Do you think that there is a kind of a war brewing between the Jews that are against Israel and Zionism and then the Jews that are pro-Israel Zionist Jews? Because I can understand if you're a Jewish person and you see what this state is doing, and they have made this association between Judaism and the state of Israel, that anything that Israel does, that's associated with being Jewish or with Judaism. So I wonder, could we be looking at some kind of great Judaic schism, between the Zionists versus the anti-Zionists? Because if you are a Jewish person and you are someone like Norman Finkelstein, Max Blumenthal, Jeffrey Sachs, all these great people that are speaking out against the state of Israel, like, you just have to hate what is this country and Netanyahu is doing to your whole religion, to your people. They'll have to carry this association with them for eternity. The idea that of tying Jewish people to this genocide, to this atrocity, to this imperialistic colonial experiment,
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, is there going to be a civil war? Well, we already see a real divide within, among Jews. Now, I think in general,
not a civil war, but
yeah, right. Okay, well, there are religious Jews, that they're Jewish sects that are not Zionist. Originally, I think it has to be remembered that the original Zionism was an entirely secular phenomenon. Theodor Herzl and these people, they were secular European Jews. And it was not something that religious Jews embraced. In fact, they looked at it very suspiciously and didn't lend it their support. And then, the Israel was founded by, again, secular Jews, and they were the dominant force in Israel for a long time. Now we're seeing that come to an end. Especially since the Six-Day War, there's been a rise of support for a rise of, let's say, religious Zionism, which was before just really not a factor. But now it's become a very, very powerful factor. So in Israel, it's just like the most extreme Zionists tend to be, not always. Again, it has to remember that Netanyahu himself is secular, but they tend to be religious Zionists, people like, Ben Gvir. But those sects, there are certain sects of Judaism that have actually been steadfastly to this day that are anti-Zionist, and they're still there. They don't seem to be much of a factor in the debate, but let's remember them. So most of the opposition to Zionism is now among secular Jews. And it's actually generally among younger secular Jews. That, again, we see that's what the polls indicate. And then what these demonstrations at universities indicate too, that many of the activists and some of the most zealous activists, protesters at these campus protests are Jews, and generally secular Jews. And they really are turning against, it's not just, it's not just, okay, we want a different flavor of Zionism, but they are turning against Zionism. Again, we see that with, those people that you have mentioned too. They're not like Chuck Schumer just trying to throw Netanyahu under the bus in order to preserve Zionism. They are against Zionism. They realize that it is wrong, that it is just, what we're seeing is sort of like the ultimate culmination of Zionism, where it was always going. It always was a form of ethnic supremacism and dispossession, for the indigenous people, and they understand that, they oppose it. So this is, again, they haven't made it into these kind of people, these anti-Zionist Jews haven't made it into the corridors of power yet. They're students. But students eventually do rise into law firms and, and go on and, into government, and they can make a real difference. So, if we don't see a change soon, if we don't see this split manifested in a real way at where the power is, I think we will eventually. That's certainly my hope. I hope that they retain their ideals, when as they rise up the various, their respective career ladders. At the present time, unfortunately, we don't see that split. It's just what we see, I would call as a phony split. It's the people that are turning on Netanyahu, but they're not going against Zionism. They're not confronting the fact of what Israel has become. And again, there's that poll, the 82% who want to ethnically cleanse, the nearly 50% that really want to kill everybody in Gaza. I mean, that is just horrifying. That's the fact that they're not really struggling with or admitting to, but it's really there for anybody who wants to see. So they figure that, well, we can get rid of Netanyahu, Smotrich, and Ben Gvir, and we can bring in, some a more westernized, kind of a friendlier face, and then everything will be okay. And maybe we can slow down the dispossession, the ethnic cleansing, but they're still Zionists, and so this ethnic cleansing, even if they get their way, if the Chuck Schumers get their way, the ethnic cleansing will go forward. It just may go forward more slowly. But yeah, I'm again, my hat's off to these people that we've named, and there are many, many others, that are working, Jewish people that are working tirelessly, truly unconditionally, against Zionism, and are not afraid to say what Israel has become. It used to be that a lot of, the kind of so-called anti-Zionist Jewish organizations, they still kind of did their best to well, on the one hand, criticize, but on the other hand, to protect Israel from the criticism that really deserved. But I see that, again, with people like Max Blumenthal, they're not doing any of that. They're absolutely, they're not pulling any of their punches. And hopefully this is a phenomenon that will spread. And this split, which is, again, kind of more on the among, younger people, we can hope that maybe it'll make inroads elsewhere. We don't see it happening within Israel itself, but there clearly is a growing split within the diaspora in places like the United States.
Right. Yeah, I'm just more talking about just kind of the classification. I think going forward now, it's like when you talk to a Jewish person, it's like you need to know, are they a Zionist Jewish person or are they a non-Zionist Jew? It's like, and I think that distinction is going to be becoming increasingly more important for people and especially for Jews. And so that's what I'm talking about, like kind of a schism going forward. Are we going to have there are two types of Jews, right. Are you the Zionist type that is supportive of what's going on, of the state of Israel? Or are you sort of the new kind of up and coming young Jews are on the other side,
of course not all of them,
not all of them, right? But
right.
That's what I'm talking about. There's this split, that we have to almost kind of redefine Judaism. Now we have to view it through the lens of Zionism because of the atrocities that Israel's committing and perpetrating every day.
Right. Well, one thing I would say too is that I think most of these people, maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the young anti-Zionist Jews, are secular, and so you don't really want to speak about Judaism, but about Jewishness, the Jewish ethnic identity, the Jewish people. That's what we're really talking about, because they don't. I think most of them. And again, I'm sure there are exceptions, and forgive me if I'm implying that if maybe I'm using too broad a brush here, but I think the great majority are secular, and they don't really think of they don't subscribe to Judaism per se, but they are Jewish. So anyway, that's what's going on, but. Yeah, these people, obviously, a lot of these, especially young people, really understand what's going on. They're horrified by it. They hate it. And I imagine, I don't know, I'm not on the campuses now, but I imagine like those ones who wanted to associate, they see what's happening. They see the future that's coming too, that, it can't be, though there is this, especially within the United States, there is this, denial of what's happening, that this wall has been built up, between, let's say, the public, certainly the mainstream public, and the reality. And, there's just a real suppression of the evidence. But they can see that wall is eventually going to break down, and people will understand sometime in the future, and there will be this permanent black stain on Israel, which has identified itself as the Jewish nation. And knowing that, I'm sure that a lot of them are just doing things to make clear, hey, I'm not one of those people. I oppose this. They do it by their actions, but, maybe they will wear a Palestinian, have a Palestinian flag pin or something like that. I'm just guessing, because I imagine that if I were one of those people, if I was a young Jew and I realized what's going on and was horrified by it, I would say, I don't want anybody to think that I'm associated with this. I want it to be known from now on that has nothing to do with me, and I'm opposed to it.
Right. Yeah, I sometimes find myself just thinking about how this is going to impact just Judaism going forward in the future, as well as Christianity within the United States, because the evangelical Christians here in the United States, there are a lot of Zionists, Christian Zionists, and it just makes me think like, whoa, if your faith, your religion was supporting and perpetrating a genocide of people within the Holy Land, like would that destroy that religion? Will that destroy that faith? I mean, like, it has to severely damage it or warp it or something, like I wonder what's going to happen in this country, because you got such a deep rooted faith that I'm a good person, I'm a good Christian, and I support Israel. Right. And then, how did that turn out?
No, it's right. That's a very difficult question to answer, again, because we're going into something deep in a person's identity. And then when, of course, the initial response to, maybe an attack on your identity or an apparent reality that appears to contradict what you've identified with, is to deny, and maybe to even double down on what you're saying. That's, I think, what we're seeing now. But at some point, it's going to break through, and I don't know what the consequence is going to be. I hope, like in the case of Christian Zionists, I hope that the response will be to say, oh, we took a wrong turn here. We did something that was fundamentally unchristian, and, we need to reassess and, return to, really the teachings of Jesus. We let this political ideology kind of seep in, and we embraced it. And, that's what I would hope would happen. I'm sure it will happen with individuals, but I can't say what's going to happen, with the crowd. Let's say, this mass psychology can be very, very irrational, and it could, I think, it could become very, very ugly before it finally is defeated. It already is very ugly, but it could become even uglier.